So this is an unscripted review on a game I've been playing a lot recently called Dusk. Dusk has achieved amazing reviews on Steam, and thankfully I was given a review code of the game, meaning I received the product for free. Although, of course, usual stuff people say, it's not going to influence how I review the game. But just let me get this out of the way straight away. It's an amazing game. So Dusk is a lot like your old 80s, 90s shooting classics, such as Doom or Quake. There's a lot of others that it could be similar to. Basically, where you go through a level and you need to collect various key cards to open certain doors, and you have a wide arsenal of guns, and you move very quick, and there's secrets, that sort of thing. Dusk is set in like this. Well, I don't really know how to describe it exactly, but let's just say like an apocalyptic world where you assume the role of this superhuman essentially, and you fight against all of these cultists, let's say, and all their like all these like demonic horde sort of creatures. Think of Doom. Really, it's very influenced by Doom, and you can see that because one of the weapons is actually a super shotgun. But yeah, there are 3 episodes, and episode 1 is centered in our world essentially, where you go from farmhouses and discover like I think there's like underground crypts at some point, or like you go to like a city, but most of it is set like in the countryside, where you go across like wide open spaces, into farmhouses, and you get attacked by all sorts of creatures that you would to some degree expect to see in a farming community. This would be creatures like scarecrows and stuff like that, or like I can best describe them as hillbillies with chainsaws, right? It's an absolutely horrific thing to see this guy with a chainsaw run at you, or like because it's pretty dark as well. But episode 1 is more of a at home feeling, whereas episode 2 is set within like these facilities underground or above ground, and they're very claustrophobic, which I quite liked. And episode 3 is like set like this hellish landscape where you meet like all of these other more terrifying twisted characters. Um, and that's one of the interesting things about Dusk, is that it plays a lot like, as I mentioned, Doom. So each episode you start afresh, but there's a vast variety of weapons to be found within Dusk. You start off with meat cleavers essentially, well, meat hooks, and this is your default weapon. It's not the greatest weapon, and as you continue playing, you find other weapons. This is like a pistol, a shotgun, sort of a rocket launcher, a rifle, a machine gun. You sort of weapons you would expect to see in your old classics. And you can dual wield all of these guns. Well, 90% of them. You can't dual wield some of them, but most of the guns you can dual wield. So you can dual wield shotguns, for argument's sake. You can dual wield pistols. You can dual wield. You can't dual. I don't. No, I think you can dual wield a machine gun. I'm not entirely sure on that one, but you can dual wield the vast majority of the weapons, and it's a real fun experience to just mow down the hordes of the monsters that you are facing. The game controls just like you would expect a type-paced action game to play, so it's very good. Your typical WASD and your mouse button to shoot it with your standard keys to change through weapons. So it controls fairly well, no problems there. It controls flawlessly, and one of the better features about the game is this enemy design is completely, well, it's horrific, but it's also, they're all unique. Now, not one of every enemy you see is the same. I mean, they all fight fairly similarly, but then they always feel distinct. Now, in order to touch upon the subject, I'm going to talk a little bit in depth about it. So we'll be touching slightly on spoiling some creatures, but it's not going to be too in depth, I promise. Some of the first creatures you encounter are like these hillbillies with chainsaws, and you find like these goat creatures, and they're your standard enemy who will try to get close to you and hurt you. Later in, you encounter enemies who shoot fireballs at you, for argument's sake. But they change up it a lot, because the enemies that you encounter later, one of the more disturbing enemies, is actually an enemy that creates like this whispering sound, I best could probably describe it as, where you can hear it but you can't see it, and it actually is like obviously completely invisible, and it walks at you and it drips blood, and you've got to keep your eye out for it. And it changed up what you're used to fighting. It's not just an enemy that is just run at you, it's invisible, so if you don't find it in a crowd of enemies, you're in a pretty tight spot. And some of the enemies later on have like bullets that track you, and you also get like turrets and stuff. There's a lot of enemies. On the top of my head, I would say there are about 26 enemy types. I'm not entirely sure how many there are in total, but there are a lot, and each one is mistakenly, not mistakenly, is distinctly different, like I said. And it also gives you the feeling of knowing which ones to take out and prioritize. There's this one enemy later on which is closest to the Cyber Demon in Doom. It's an absolute nightmare to deal with, and every time I saw one, it was my priority, regardless of what was around, to kill it. And this extends to the bosses too. A lot of the bosses are pretty interesting. Some of the bosses are just enemies you encounter later. They're just beefed up, and they act as sort of an introduction to the enemies themselves. So, for argument's sake, one of the bosses you might fight is just a regular enemy later on. This happens a lot in games. Not every boss follows this procedure, but a vast amount of them do. I'd say, I think in total there's about 11 bosses through the 3 episodes. I'd say, not confidently, maybe 4 of them are just regular enemies you encounter later. I know that the one I fought definitely was the enemy with tracking projectiles I mentioned, which is an absolute annoyance. One of the more fun aspects of the game too is that you can like flip your guns about. So I think it's R, and you flip what's in your hand. It doesn't matter what you have in your hand, you flip it, and you can if you dual wielding things, you can flip those too. So it's like I don't know about you, but I have a habit of clicking like a melee button just for fun if I'm waiting for something. So you can like shoot your pistols and like flip them, or if you have a shotgun, you can just flip them about repeatedly. And I quite like these little touches. I quite like where you can just you can just flip them about. But I believe they're also a melee attack because you can use them to break certain objects. I never used them in melee. I tried to stay away from melee unless I had a very good melee weapon, of which there are 2 in the game. The one you start with and one that you may find. And I quite like this idea of flipping weapons because it's addicting. Who doesn't want to just flip a gun? And there's a lot of secrets in the game. Now, unfortunately, it's kind of like some of the secrets are in places you never would think of looking, or they involve like a very convoluted sort of like approach. Like maybe you need to push a button in this room and then run 5 rooms over and then the door opens. And some of them are literally like behind the sofa sort of secrets. It's like, hey, this corridor, I can either go down this corridor or go through the door I'm obviously supposed to go through. I'll go down this corridor. Hey, what's around this corner? Hey, it's a secret. I mean, literally, that happens to me a few times. So you get those sort of secrets where it's like, this is obviously a secret. This obviously isn't a secret, but it's considered a secret anyway. If you like a lot of 80s shooters or 90s shooters, games which are just fast-paced, over the top, where you move very quickly and you carry a large arsenal of weapons, I very highly recommend Dusk. It's a great game. There's 3 episodes. Every episode is different. Each level is slightly distinct, and there's a large variety of enemies. It's a game that you would expect to see a lot of in today's market, but you don't. And it's a game that is done well and is very representative of the games from years ago, of which, again, if you like Doom or Quake or anything like that, they play just like it with its own twist.